He came back to settle his father's legacy, but instead found himself facing his own family over the coal trust. A Navy SEAL and his loyal dog followed a cry in the winter night and saved those left behind. The report said everything was fine, but the truth outside was as cold as the snow itself.
I'm
Then
here now.
a trap was set.
Stay with me.
And with
We
just
have to
one
move.
video, he became the suspect in the
can't
eyes
feel
of
my
the
hands.
entire town. When greed hides behind the name of helping others, the truth becomes the most dangerous thing he holds. Between pressure from his family and a town that turned its back, he must choose walk away or stay and change everything. Where are you watching from? Like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers so we can continue telling meaningful stories. Now let's begin this journey. The town had not changed. Or perhaps it had, but in a way that made it harder to recognize, like a face aged by cold wind rather than time. Snow pressed against the narrow streets of northern Vermont, soft but relentless, muffling footsteps, swallowing sound, turning every breath into a quiet cloud that vanished too quickly. The houses stood apart from one another like people who had once spoken often and then slowly stopped. Evan Cole stepped out of the car and closed the door with more force than necessary. He stood still for a moment, letting the cold hit him properly. It cut through fabric, through muscle memory, through whatever remained of the man who used to belong here. He was tall, around 6 feet, his body compact and controlled, the kind of strength that came from endurance rather than display. His tactical combat shirt, a worn military gray, had softened with time, the cuffs frayed, the shoulders faintly bleached by years of washing and weather. Beneath it, a dark red thermal layer clung close to his skin, just visible at the collar. His combat pants were old, earth-toned, knees worn thin, pockets sagging slightly. The boots on his feet had seen more terrain than most people would in a lifetime. His face was clean-shaven, no beard to soften the lines, just a square jaw, defined cheekbones, and skin lightly weathered by northern cold. His eyes, gray-blue, held a stillness that made people uncomfortable if they looked too long. Not because they were cold, because they were calm. Too calm. As if whatever storms had passed through him had already done their damage. Behind him, a German shepherd stepped down from the passenger side. Ranger, 5, maybe 6 years old. Cream gray-black sable coat. Thick but not heavy, built for work rather than show. His amber eyes scanned the street with quiet intensity. A black harness wrapped around his body, edged with a dark, almost muted red trim, a handle resting between his shoulders. He did not bark. He never did unless it mattered. Evan exhaled slowly. The funeral had been short, efficient, just like everything his father had ever done. No warmth, no apology, just a will, a lawyer, and a set of conditions that felt less like inheritance and more like a final command. Cole Community Trust, everything inside it, and a clause that still echoed in his head. Any heir who causes harm to the trust, directly or indirectly, will be permanently disqualified from inheritance. Evan almost laughed when he heard it. Even in death, the old man was still controlling the board, still setting rules, still deciding who was worthy. Margaret had sat straight-backed during the reading mid-50s, composed, elegant in a way that felt practiced. Her silver-streaked hair was tied low, her expression carefully measured. She had never raised her voice when Evan was younger. She didn't need to. Ryan, on the other hand, early 30s, sharp suit, sharper smile, had looked like he was already calculating something, even while pretending to mourn. Evan didn't stay long enough to find out what, because none of it mattered. Not anymore. He reached for the driver's door. "Let's go," he muttered. Ranger didn't move. Evan frowned slightly, glancing back. The dog stood completely still, Not hesitant, not distracted. Frozen. His ears were up, body rigid, weight shifted forward. Listening. Evan followed his gaze. Nothing, just snow, just wind, then… Help! It was barely a sound, not even a word, more like breath shaped into something fragile. Evan straightened. You hear that? Ranger was already moving. No command, no hesitation. He lunged forward, cutting through the snow, disappearing between two narrow houses where the streetlights didn't reach. Damn it! Evan took off after him. The snow dragged at his boots, each step sinking deeper than the last. Cold air burned his lungs, sharp and clean. The wind shifted, carrying that faint sound again, or maybe just memory. Ranger stopped suddenly near the back of a small, aging house. He let out a single, sharp bark. Evan reached him seconds later, and saw her. A woman lay half-buried in the snow, elderly, thin. Her coat too light for this kind of weather, fabric stiff with frost. One arm stretched outward as if she had tried to reach something that never came closer. Her face was pale, almost blue around the lips. Her breathing was shallow. Too shallow. Evan dropped to his knees instantly. Training took over. Pulse check. Weak, but there. Stay with me, he said, his voice low but firm. He brushed snow away from her face, his hand steady despite the cold biting through his gloves. Ranger moved closer, pressing near her side, his body heat bleeding into the frozen space around her. The woman's eyes fluttered. For a second, they met Evan's. Clouded. Frightened. But alive. He didn't waste time. He slid one arm under her shoulders, the other beneath her legs, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been. Too light. As if the world had been taking pieces of her long before tonight. Ranger stayed close as Evan carried her back toward the car. The door slammed shut behind them. The engine roared to life. And only then, only in that brief second of stillness, did Evan notice the small cloth bag clutched weakly in her hand. He hesitated, then gently pulled it free. Inside, a few pills, a folded piece of paper. He opened it, and the world shifted just slightly. Cole Community Trust, winter support confirmed. Evan stared at the words, then glanced at the woman in the passenger seat, her breathing still fragile, her body trembling despite the heat slowly filling the car. He looked back at the paper, then back at her. Something didn't line up, not just emotionally, logically. Ranger suddenly growled, low, controlled, not at the woman, at the bag. Evan's eyes narrowed. He reached in again, this time slower. His fingers brushed the lining and felt something else. Another piece of paper, hidden. He pulled it out, smaller, older, crinkled. No official logo, just handwriting, shaky, uneven, 3 words. No one came. Evan didn't move for a long second. The heater hummed softly. Outside, the snow kept falling, indifferent, steady, endless. Inside the car, something far quieter had just broken open. Not anger, not yet. Something colder, something sharper. Doubt. He folded both papers carefully, set them side by side on the dashboard. One clean, official, perfect. One fragile, human, real. Ranger settled back down, but his eyes never left the woman. Evan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. For years, he had believed one thing about his father. That the man had never cared enough to look beyond numbers. Never cared enough to see what was actually happening. But now, he wasn't so sure what this was. Neglect? Or something worse? The car pulled onto the empty road, headlights cutting through the storm. Evan didn't say anything else. But he didn't turn the car toward the highway anymore. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and old wood. It wasn't the kind of place that promised miracles, just survival. A narrow hallway stretched ahead, lit by flickering fluorescent lights that hummed softly, like they were tired of doing their job, but kept going anyway. Evan Cole pushed the door open with his shoulder, the cold still clinging to him even after the drive. Snow melted slowly off his boots, leaving small, dark marks on the floor behind him. "Help," he called out, his voice steady but urgent. A woman appeared from the back room almost immediately. She was in her early 40s, medium height, with practical strength in the way she moved. No wasted motion. Her dark brown hair was tied loosely at the nape, a few strands escaping around her temples. Her face was narrow, intelligent, and tired in a way that didn't come from a single long day, but from many years of choosing responsibility over rest. Her eyes, sharp, observant, took in the situation in less than a second. "Put her here," she said, already clearing a small examination bed. This was Dr. Lena Brooks, the town doctor, the kind of person who had probably delivered babies, set broken bones, and signed death certificates in the same week, because there was no one else to do it. Evan laid the elderly woman down carefully. She was outside. "Snow," he said. Lena nodded, already checking the woman's pulse. "Hypothermia," she murmured. "Borderline severe." Her hands moved quickly, controlled. "Get that heater closer," she added, gesturing toward a small portable unit. Evan didn't hesitate. Ranger stayed near the door, watching. Always watching. His body relaxed slightly, but not fully. Not until the situation resolved. Not until the threat, whatever it had been, was gone. Minutes stretched quietly. The clinic filled with the low sounds of recovery machines, breath, movement. Evan stood off to the side, arms crossed, eyes on the woman. Alive? Barely. Dr. Lena worked with a quiet intensity. No panic, no wasted words, just action. "She's lucky," Lena said finally, glancing up at Evan. "Another 20 minutes out there and we'd be having a different conversation." Evan nodded once. "Does she have family?" Lena asked. Evan hesitated. "I don't know." That answer sat heavier than it should have. Lena studied him briefly. There was something about Evan, something in the way he held himself, the way he didn't fill silence unnecessarily, that told her he wasn't from here anymore, but also not entirely gone. "You're Cole, aren't you?" she asked. Evan's jaw tightened slightly. "Yeah." "Thought so," she said. Not judgment, just recognition. "I saw you at the service." He didn't respond, didn't need to. Everyone had seen him. The son who left, the one who didn't come back. Until now. The old woman stirred, a faint movement, a breath that sounded less fragile. Lena leaned closer. "Stay with me," she said gently, voice softer now. "You're safe." The woman's lips moved. No sound came out, but the tension in her face eased slightly. Evan exhaled quietly. Not relief. Just confirmation. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the 2 pieces of paper. The official one first, clean, structured, perfect. Cole Community Trust winter support confirmed. He placed it on the small metal tray beside Lena. "She had this," he said. Lena glanced at it, then looked back at the woman. Her expression didn't change dramatically, but something in her eyes shifted. Recognition. Not surprise. That bothered Evan more than if she had reacted. "You've seen this before," he said. Lena didn't answer immediately. She adjusted the blanket around the woman first, then stood upright. "I've seen forms like that," she said carefully. "That's not what I asked." Their eyes met, Evan's gaze steady, Lena's thoughtful. Then she sighed softly. "I've seen patients who supposedly received help," she said. "Heating assistance, medication coverage, food delivery." "And?" Evan pressed. And they still end up here, she said simply. Silence settled again. But this time, it wasn't neutral. It had weight. Evan looked down at the second paper in his hand. The smaller one. The one that didn't belong in any system. He didn't show it. Not yet. "Where's the trust office?" he asked. Lena raised an eyebrow slightly. "Already?" she said. "I'm not here for long," Evan replied. That was half true, or at least it had been. She studied him again, then nodded. "Downtown? Old municipal building, second floor." "Thanks." He turned to leave. "Hey," Lena said. He paused. "Whoever she is," Lena added, glancing at the woman, "she didn't get there by accident." Evan didn't turn back. "I know." As Evan reached the door, Ranger suddenly moved, not toward him, toward the examination table. The dog stepped closer, nose low, slow, deliberate. He sniffed near the woman's coat, then froze. A soft, low growl vibrated in his chest. Not fear. Recognition. Evan turned. "What is it?" Ranger didn't look at him. He stared at a small detail Evan had missed. The inside lining of the woman's coat. There, barely visible under the dim clinic light. A tiny stitched tag. Not a brand, not a label, a symbol, a simple geometric mark. Clean, precise, intentional. Evan stepped closer. Something about it felt wrong. Not random. Not accidental. Placed. Ranger backed away slowly, but his eyes didn't soften. They sharpened, like something had just been confirmed. Evan reached out but stopped short of touching it. A thought flickered, then settled. This wasn't just about money. He straightened, pulled his hand back, and for the first time since returning to town, he didn't feel like leaving. He turned to Lena again. "Is there someone who handles the trust legally?" he asked. Lena nodded. "Yes, Eleanor Briggs. Where do I find her?" "She doesn't come to people," Lena said. "People go to her." Evan gave a faint, humorless exhale. "Figures." Outside, the storm had calmed, but the cold remained. It always did. Ranger stepped beside him as they exited the clinic. The dog glanced up once, not for instruction, just acknowledgement. Evan looked down at him, then out at the town. Same streets, same silence, same distance between houses. But now, it felt different. Not because anything had changed, but because something had been seen. "All right," Evan muttered. "Let's find out what this really is." Morning in the town did not arrive with light. It arrived with a dull gray that seeped through the sky and settled over everything like a quiet resignation. The storm had passed, but it had not taken the cold with it. It lingered in the walls, in the ground, in the spaces between people. Evan Cole stood outside the clinic, hands buried in the pockets of his worn combat pants, breath steady, controlled. He hadn't slept. Not really. Not in the way that mattered. Behind him, the clinic door clicked softly as Dr. Lena Brooks stepped out, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Up close, the fatigue in her face was more visible fine lines at the corners of her eyes, a faint stiffness in her shoulders. Not weakness, just years of carrying weight that didn't belong to one person alone. "She's stable," Lena said, her voice low, practical. Evan nodded. "That's good." Lena watched him for a moment, then tilted her head slightly. "You're still here," she said. It wasn't a question. Evan exhaled through his nose. "For now." Lena gave a small, almost knowing nod. "For now," she repeated. She didn't ask why. People in this town had learned not to ask questions they weren't ready to hear answers to. Ranger stepped out beside Evan, his paws silent against the thin layer of packed snow. His coat caught the weak morning light shades of cream, gray, and black blending into something that looked natural, unremarkable at first glance, until you noticed the way he moved. Purposeful. Aware. He scanned the street again, ears twitching at sounds Evan couldn't hear. Not searching. Assessing. Evan glanced down at him briefly. "You're not done, are you?" he murmured. Ranger didn't respond. He just turned his head slightly, toward the far end of the street. They walked. No destination. Not yet. Just movement. Evan needed to see. Not reports, not files. Real things. Real people. The first house they approached looked like it had given up trying to hold warmth. The paint was peeling, the porch sagging slightly to one side. Snow had drifted up against the door, untouched. Evan stepped forward and knocked. No answer. He waited. Knocked again. Nothing. Ranger sniffed near the base of the door, then moved along the wall slowly, nose low, reading something invisible. Evan's jaw tightened. He reached for the handle. Locked. He didn't force it. Not yet. Instead, he stepped back, noted the address, moved on. The second house was different. Lights on, curtains drawn, a faint trail in the snow leading to the door. Evan knocked. After a moment, the door opened just a crack. An elderly man peered out. Thin. Late 70s, maybe early 80s. His shoulders were narrow, posture slightly hunched, but his eyes sharp blue, alert held a kind of stubborn clarity. "What?" the man said, not unkindly, but not welcoming either. Evan kept his tone even. "Just checking in. You doing all right?" The man studied him, took in the clothes, the stance, the dog. "You from the trust?" he asked. Evan paused, then shook his head. "No." The man's expression shifted, subtle but definite, less guarded. "Then what do you want?" he asked. "Nothing," Evan said. That answer lingered, suspicious. People didn't come to doors in winter with nothing to gain, not anymore. "I'm fine," the man said after a moment. "You sure?" Evan asked. The man nodded once. "I get my deliveries," he added. Evan watched him. "From the coal fund?" A beat. Then the man shrugged. "Supposedly." Something tightened in Evan's chest. Not anger. Recognition. "I'll come back," Evan said. The man gave a short huff. "People say that," he replied. Then he closed the door. They moved on, house after house, some empty, some occupied but silent, some with people who spoke just enough to end the conversation, and always that same pattern. Paper said one thing. Reality said another. By midday, the cold had settled deeper into Evan's bones. Not physically, something else. A slow realization that this wasn't a single mistake. It was consistent. Structured. They reached a small, weathered house at the edge of the street. The yard was uneven, patches of snow broken by frozen dirt. A narrow walkway led to the door, half cleared, like someone had started and then stopped halfway through. Ranger slowed, then stopped. He looked at Evan, not forward. At him, then turned toward the door again. Waiting. Evan stepped forward and knocked, once, twice. Silence. Then a voice. Old. Sharp. "I told you people already leave me alone." Evan exhaled slowly. "I'm not with them," he said, a pause, longer this time. The door opened. Mrs. Doyle stood in the doorway. 79, maybe 80. Small, almost fragile in build, but there was nothing fragile about the way she held herself. Her gray hair was pulled back tightly, her face lined not just by age, but by years of refusing to bend. Her eyes dark, sharp, untrusting, locked onto Evan immediately. "You again?" she said. Evan didn't correct her. "Just checking in," he replied. "I don't need checking," she snapped. Her gaze dropped to Ranger. The dog didn't move, didn't wag, just stood there, present. Mrs. Doyle's expression shifted, just slightly, not softening, but recognizing. She leaned forward a fraction. "That dog," she said quietly. Evan frowned. "What about him?" Mrs. Doyle didn't answer right away. She kept looking at Ranger. Then, almost to herself, "He came here before." Evan's breath slowed. "When?" he asked. She shook her head faintly. "Night, snow, like last night." Her eyes narrowed. "I thought I imagined it." Ranger remained still, but his posture changed, subtly, like something had just aligned. Evan crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to Mrs. Doyle's level. "What happened?" he asked. She hesitated. Not because she didn't remember, because she didn't want to say it out loud. "Nothing," she said finally. "I didn't open the door." That answer hung in the air. Heavy. Incomplete. Evan nodded once. "All right," he said. He didn't push, didn't try to force more. "I've got wood out back," he added after a moment. "Need splitting. I can help." Mrs. Doyle stiffened. "I didn't ask for help." "I know," Evan said. Another pause, then, "Come back tomorrow," she said abruptly. Not acceptance, not refusal, something in between. Evan stood. "Tomorrow," he agreed. As they walked away, Evan felt it. That shift, small but real, not trust, not yet, but the absence of immediate rejection. And in a place like this, that mattered. Ranger moved ahead again, but slower now, more deliberate. Like he wasn't just searching anymore, like he was remembering. Evan glanced back once. Mrs. Doyle was still in the doorway, watching them leave. The town hadn't changed overnight. It wouldn't. That wasn't how things worked. But something had started, not in the system, not in the reports, in the space between one person deciding not to close a door completely. Evan adjusted his gloves, breath steady again. "All right," he murmured. "We take it one door at a time." By late afternoon, the sky lowered again. Not dark, just heavy. The kind of gray that pressed down on rooftops and shoulders alike, as if the town itself were bracing for something it could not quite name. Evan Cole stood in the narrow yard behind Mrs. Doyle's house, splitting wood. Each swing of the axe landed clean, efficient. No wasted motion. The rhythm had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with control, breath in, strike, reset. It was the same pattern he'd carried through years of training, through places far colder than this, where mistakes had names and consequences. The pile of logs grew slowly beside him. Inside the house, a faint light flickered behind drawn curtains. Mrs. Doyle had not invited him in, but she hadn't told him to leave either. For now, that was enough. Ranger moved along the edge of the yard, nose low, tracing invisible paths across frozen ground. Every now and then he paused, lifted his head, and listened. Not for sounds, but for absence gaps in the world that didn't fit. Evan noticed. He always did. "You picking something up?" he asked quietly. Ranger didn't answer, just shifted direction, stepping toward the back fence. Then stopped. Completely. Evan lowered the axe slowly. "What is it?" The dog's body stiffened, not in alarm, but in certainty. That was different. Alarm could be wrong. Certainty rarely was. The wind changed. It came in sharper this time, carrying with it a distant metallic rattle. Loose siding. Or something else. Evan stepped closer, boots crunching softly against packed snow. Beyond the fence, a narrow alley ran between properties, barely wide enough for a person, choked with drifted snow and discarded boards. Ranger slipped through a broken section without hesitation. Evan followed. The cold hit harder there, funneled through the tight space, cutting sideways. His breath came out in shorter bursts now, more controlled, instinctively adjusting to the shift. "Ranger," he called softly. No bark. but he heard movement ahead. Fast. Then silence. He reached the end of the alley and saw it. A small structure, half hidden behind stacked crates and snow buildup. Not quite a shed, not quite a garage, something temporary that had become permanent. The door was closed. No light, no sound. Ranger stood in front of it, unmoving, waiting. Evan stepped forward and placed his hand on the door. Cold. Not just from the weather. Cold in the way metal gets when it hasn't been touched in a while. He listened. Nothing. Then, a faint thud. From inside, not loud, not deliberate, but real. Evan's jaw tightened. "Someone's in there," he muttered. He tried the handle. Locked, of course. He stepped back once, measuring, then drove his shoulder into the door. The wood cracked, splintering along the frame. Second hit harder. The latch gave. The door burst inward. The air inside was wrong. Still. Stale. Colder than outside. Evan stepped in quickly, eyes adjusting. And there, on the ground, another elderly woman. Thin, frail, bundled in layers that weren't enough. Her hands were bound loosely in front of her, not tight, not meant to restrain fully, just enough to slow movement. A blanket lay beside her, untouched, as if it had been placed there for appearance, not use. Her eyes were open, wide, unfocused, alive but barely holding on. Evan moved immediately. He knelt beside her, cutting the binding with a small blade from his boot. "Hey," he said, voice low but firm. "Stay with me." Her lips trembled. No words, just breath. Ranger circled once, then settled close to her side, pressing warmth into her. The dog's presence grounded the space something steady in a place that felt staged, and that word surfaced in Evan's mind without warning. Staged. Evan's eyes moved across the room, quick scan, instinct, and then he saw it, in the far corner, mounted high, a small black device, barely visible against the wall. Lens, pointed directly at the center of the room. At him. Evan didn't move for half a second, just long enough to understand. Then his expression hardened, not outwardly, but internally, like a door closing. He shifted his body slightly, blocking the woman from the camera's line of sight. Too late for that to matter, but not too late to recognize the pattern. "Ranger," he said quietly. The dog looked up. Alert, ready. Evan lifted the woman carefully. Same motion as before, same control. But this time, something inside him had changed. The situation wasn't random. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't even just failure. It was intention. Outside, the wind picked up again. Snow whipped across the open space, erasing tracks almost as soon as they formed. Evan carried the woman back through the alley, steps steady, breath measured. He didn't rush. Rushing led to mistakes. Mistakes led to loss. He had learned that long ago. As they reached the street, a car passed slowly. Too slowly. Evan caught a glimpse of the driver. A man. Mid-30s? Clean cut. Neutral expression that didn't quite hide the fact that he was watching. Then the car moved on. Gone. But not forgotten. By the time Evan reached the clinic again, his arms burned slightly from the effort. He didn't feel it fully. Adrenaline had a way of narrowing focus. Dr. Lena opened the door before he knocked this time. Her eyes widened just slightly. "Another one?" she said. Evan nodded. "She was locked in a structure behind Doyle's place." Lena stepped aside immediately. "Bring her in." Inside, the routine repeated. But it didn't feel the same. Not anymore. "She's worse than the last one," Lena said quietly as she worked. "Body temp's lower." Evan stood near the wall this time, not hovering. Watching. Thinking. replaying. "You're seeing it now, aren't you?" Lena said without looking at him. Evan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The heater hummed. The woman's breathing steadied slightly. Enough. For now. Evan turned toward the window. Snow covered everything outside again. Clean, untouched, like nothing had happened. But something had. Something deliberate. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the fabric where the earlier papers rested. Didn't take them out, didn't need to. This wasn't about paperwork anymore. He exhaled slowly, then said, almost to himself, "This wasn't a mistake." Ranger lay near the examination table, head up, eyes open. Not resting, not relaxed. Watching. Evan glanced down at him, then back at Lena. "Where do I find Eleanor Briggs?" he asked. Lena met his gaze, held it, then nodded once. "Tomorrow," she said. "You'll find her tomorrow." Evan didn't argue, didn't push, for the first time since arriving back in town. He wasn't thinking about leaving at all. The video was already everywhere by the time Evan stepped out of the clinic. It didn't explode the way things did in bigger cities. There was no sudden surge, no flood of comments pouring in from strangers across the country. Here, it moved differently, quietly, steadily, like cold creeping into a room through cracks you didn't notice until it was already inside. Evan didn't need to see it to know what it looked like, but he did anyway. He stood beside his truck, the engine off, the world unnaturally still around him, and watched the footage play on Lena's phone. It began mid-action, no context, no lead-in, just Evan forcing open the door of the storage structure, stepping inside with that same controlled urgency he had used 100 times before in situations that required immediate response. But here, stripped of everything that came before, it looked different. Deliberate. Calculated. Suspicious. The angle was high, slightly tilted, enough to give the impression of surveillance without being obvious. The camera caught his face just long enough, the tension in his jaw, the sharpness in his movement. Then the footage cut. Abruptly. Before the woman, before the cold, before the truth. Evan handed the phone back without a word. Lena watched him carefully. "This isn't going to stay small," she said. "I know." His voice was even. Too even. Across the street, two people stood outside a grocery store. They weren't talking loudly. They didn't need to. The way they glanced over quick, uncertain, then away said everything. Recognition. And something else. Distance. Ranger stood beside Evan, silent, his amber eyes tracking movement in slow arcs. His posture had shifted again. Not tense, not aggressive, protective. Subtle, but unmistakable. "People are going to start asking questions," Lena said. Evan nodded. "They should." "That's not what I mean." He looked at her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Lena sighed, tucking the phone into her coat. "They won't ask you," she said. "They'll decide first." Evan glanced back at the clinic window. Inside, the second woman lay under blankets, fighting her way back from something she should never have been put through. And outside, the narrative had already changed. He opened the truck door. "Where are you going?" Lena asked. "Town," he said. "That's not going to help." "It's not about helping." He paused. "It's about seeing how far this has gone." The drive into town took less than 5 minutes. It felt longer. Every passing storefront seemed to carry a new layer of attention eyes that lingered just a second too long. Conversations that dipped into silence as he passed. The diner was the first place he stopped. It had always been the center of everything here, not because of the food, but because of what happened around it. Conversations, decisions, small alliances that shaped larger ones. Evan pushed the door open. A bell chimed overhead. The warmth hit him first thick, almost overwhelming after the cold outside. The smell followed. Coffee, fried food, something sweet baking in the back. Then the silence. Not complete, but enough. Enough for him to feel it settle. At the counter stood a man in his early 50s. Broad shoulders, thick hands, the kind of build that came from years of working with tools rather than lifting weights. His face was weathered, lined by sun and wind, his beard rough and uneven, as if he trimmed it only when it became impossible to ignore. This was Tom Halverson, owner of the diner, son of the man Evan had spoken to earlier that day. Tom had grown up here, stayed here, watched people come and go, and slowly learned that staying didn't always mean belonging. He wiped his hands on a cloth as Evan approached, didn't smile, didn't frown, just watched. "You want something?" Tom asked. His tone was neutral, careful. Evan took a seat. "Coffee?" Tom poured it without comment, setting the mug down with a quiet clink. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Tom leaned slightly on the counter. "I saw the video," he said. Evan didn't react. "I figured." Tom nodded once. "You got anything to say about it?" Evan wrapped his hands around the mug, feeling the heat seep slowly into his fingers. "Yes." Tom waited. Evan looked up. "I went in because someone was inside." Tom's jaw shifted slightly. "That's it?" "That's it." Tom studied him for a long second, then glanced toward the back of the diner, where a few customers sat, pretending not to listen. "You know how this looks?" Tom said quietly. Evan nodded. "Yeah." "And you're not going to explain more than that?" Evan took a slow sip of coffee. "No." Tom exhaled through his nose. "People don't like blanks," he said. "They fill them in." "I know." Ranger suddenly lifted his head, not toward the door, not toward the people, toward the far corner of the diner, where a small television hung near the ceiling, muted, playing the same video, over and over and over again. Ranger's ears twitched once, then flattened slightly. A low sound barely audible escaped him. Not a growl, something closer to disapproval, recognition of something wrong. Evan followed his gaze, watched the loop, the same moment, repeated, refined, simplified, until it became something else entirely. He set the mug down, gently, too gently. "This wasn't random," he said. Tom frowned slightly. "What?" "The video," Evan continued. "The angle, the cut, the timing." He leaned back slightly. "Someone wanted it to look exactly like this." Tom didn't answer right away, because part of him already knew that, and part of him didn't want to. "You're saying someone set you up?" Tom asked finally. Evan didn't nod, didn't deny it. "I'm saying," he replied, "someone knew I'd be there." The words settled into the space between them. Heavy, uncomfortable. Tom looked away first, back to the counter, back to the routine. Because routine was easier than implication. "People aren't going to wait for proof," he said. "I'm not asking them to." "Then what are you asking?" Evan stood, left a few bills on the counter. "Nothing," he said. Tom looked up again, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not belief. Not yet. But hesitation. Evan turned toward the door. Ranger fell into step beside him. Outside, the cold hit again, sharper now, more present. Across the street, a woman pulled her coat tighter and turned away as Evan looked in her direction. Further down, two teenagers whispered, glancing back at him with a mix of curiosity and unease. The town hadn't rejected him, not completely, but it had shifted, subtly, and in a place like this, subtle changes mattered. Evan stopped beside his truck, looked out over the street, then down at Ranger. The dog met his gaze. Steady, unwavering. "They're going to believe it," Evan said quietly. Ranger didn't move, didn't need to. Evan nodded once. Not agreement, acceptance. "All right," he murmured. If this was what it looked like, if this was the version of him they were choosing to see, then words weren't going to change it. He opened the truck door. "Let's get to work." The next morning did not feel like a beginning. It felt like continuation of something already set in motion, something that had chosen its direction long before Evan Cole decided to stay. The town was quieter than usual, not peaceful, watchful. Evan could feel it in the way doors closed a second earlier than they used to, in the way conversations shifted tone when he walked past. No confrontation, no accusations spoken aloud, just a quiet withdrawal. That, in some ways, was worse. He stood outside the old municipal building downtown, the one Lena had pointed him toward the day before. It rose from the street like a relic from a different time brick worn by decades of winters, windows slightly uneven, the entrance steps chipped but still solid. This was where the trust operated from. Not the financial side, the real money moved elsewhere, through systems designed to stay unseen. This was the visible part, the part people trusted, or used to. Ranger stood beside him, still as ever, his breath steady in the cold air. His amber eyes flicked once towards the building, then back to Evan, as if confirming something unspoken. Evan adjusted his gloves. "All right," he murmured. "Let's see what's real." Inside, the building smelled faintly of paper and dust. The kind of smell that came from records, old ones, filed and forgotten, and new ones, added without question. At the far end of the hallway stood a glass door with a small plaque. Cole Community Trust, Administrative Office. Evan pushed it open. The office was modest. Too modest, for something that controlled as much as this did. 3 desks, 2 occupied. A woman in her late 20s looked up first. She had straight blonde hair tied back in a tight ponytail, her posture rigid as if she had learned early in life that precision was safer than expression. Her face was pale, almost translucent under the fluorescent lighting, and her eyes moved quickly, taking in details, calculating before reacting. This was Clara Jensen. Administrative assistant, efficient, careful, the kind of person who knew how to follow systems, but not how to question them. She recognized Evan immediately. Of course she did. Everyone had seen the video. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "Can I help you?" she asked. Polite, guarded. Evan stepped forward. "I'm here to review the trust records." Clara hesitated. Just for a moment. Then her gaze flicked to the second desk. A man sat there, mid-40s, broad but soft around the edges, like someone who had once been physically active but had traded it for something easier over time. His hair was thinning, combed carefully to hide it, and his tie sat slightly too tight against his collar. His face was round, but his eyes, small, quick, constantly shifting, betrayed something else. Calculation. This was Mark Ellison, regional coordinator. He handled distribution logistics, which meant he handled where the help actually went. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying Evan with open curiosity. "So," he said, voice smooth but edged, "you're the one from the video." Evan didn't respond to that. "I need access to the records," he said instead. Mark smiled faintly. "Do you now?" There was no hostility in his tone. That would have been easier. Instead, there was something more dangerous. Dismissal. Ranger moved, not toward Evan, not toward the door, toward Mark. The dog stepped forward slowly, his paws silent against the floor. Mark's smile faltered, just slightly. Ranger stopped beside the desk, then lowered his head, sniffed, not at Mark directly, at the lower drawer. Evan's eyes shifted, followed the movement, noticed the tension in Mark's shoulders. Subtle, but real. Ranger lifted his head again. And this time, he didn't look at Evan. He looked at Mark. Directly. Not aggressive, not loud, but there was no mistaking the message. Mark cleared his throat. "Control your dog," he said, forcing a chuckle that didn't quite land. Evan didn't move. "Open the drawer," he said. Silence, heavy, immediate. Clara looked between them, uncertain. Mark's fingers tapped once on the desk, then stopped. "You don't get to come in here and start making demands," he said, tone tightening. Evan stepped closer. Not fast, not threatening. Just enough. "I'm not asking." The room shifted. Something invisible, something that had been holding steady now beginning to crack. Mark's smile disappeared. Completely. For a moment it looked like he might refuse. Then, slowly, he reached down, opened the drawer. Inside, files, loose papers, nothing unusual at first glance. Until Evan leaned slightly and saw the corner of a familiar document. The same format, the same header, Cole Community Trust. But different. The numbers, the distribution entries. Altered. Evan pulled one file out, read it, then another. And another. Patterns, not random discrepancies. Consistent adjustments, small enough to avoid detection, large enough to matter. He exhaled slowly. Not surprised? Not anymore. "You've been moving allocations," Evan said. Mark didn't answer, didn't deny it. Clara stepped back slightly, her face paling. I just process what I'm given," she said quickly. "I don't—" Evan held up a hand. "I know." Because he did. This wasn't her. She was part of the system, not the one shaping it. Mark leaned forward now, elbows on the desk. "You think you understand what you're looking at?" he said quietly. Evan met his gaze. "I understand enough." Mark's eyes flickered just once, then steadied. "People get help," he said. "Not always where it's written, not always how it's recorded, but it gets there." Evan's jaw tightened. "No," he said. "It doesn't." The words didn't rise, didn't need to. They landed heavier because of it. Clara looked down at the files again, then at Mark. Something in her expression shifted. Doubt. Evan set the documents back down carefully. "I'm bringing in an independent audit," he said. Mark's reaction was immediate. A flash. Gone just as quickly. "You don't have that authority," Mark replied. Evan's gaze didn't waver. "I do." Silence again. Longer this time. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling faintly against the windows. Inside, something had already been set in motion. Evan turned. "Come on," he said quietly to Ranger. The dog stepped back into position beside him without hesitation. As they reached the door, Clara spoke. "Wait." Evan paused, turned slightly. Her hands were trembling, just enough to notice. "Those records," she said. "There are more, archived, older ones." She swallowed. "I can show you." Mark's chair scraped sharply against the floor. "That's not necessary," he said quickly. Clara didn't look at him. Not anymore. She was looking at Evan. Something had shifted. Not completely, but enough. Evan nodded once. "Tomorrow," he said. He didn't push further, didn't force the moment, because trust, real trust, wasn't built in confrontation. It was built in what came after. Outside, the cold felt sharper, cleaner. Evan stood on the steps of the building, looking out over the town. Same streets, same people, same silence. But now, there was structure beneath it, patterns, intent. He exhaled slowly. "This isn't going to fix itself," he said. Ranger glanced up at him, then forward again, and for the first time since the video, Evan wasn't reacting anymore. He was moving. The town did not wake differently. It didn't apologize. It didn't rewind. Morning came the same way it always did. Gray light stretching slowly across rooftops, frost clinging stubbornly to window edges, the quiet rhythm of people choosing whether or not to step outside. But something beneath it had shifted. Not loudly. Not all at once. Just enough. Evan Cole stood at the edge of the municipal building steps again, the same place he had stood the day before, but with a different kind of stillness inside him. Not waiting. Not reacting. Ready. Beside him, Ranger stood with that same composed alertness, his sable coat catching faint light, his amber eyes moving slowly across the street as if tracking a pattern no one else could see. No leash tension, no commands, just presence. The door behind them opened. Clara Jensen stepped out first. Her posture had changed. Not dramatically, but enough that it mattered. Her shoulders, once tight with the need to do everything correctly, now carried something else. Resolve. She clutched a small stack of files close to her chest, fingers pressing into the edges hard enough to leave faint marks. Behind her came another man. Late 50s. Tall, but slightly stooped, as if time had gradually bent him forward under the weight of decisions he had once believed were temporary. His hair was gray, thinning at the crown, and his face carried the quiet weariness of someone who had spent years understanding systems, and even longer trying not to look too closely at them. This was Daniel Brooks, a forensic accountant, not from the town, brought in quietly, the kind of man who didn't raise his voice because he didn't need to. Numbers did that for him. Evan gave a small nod. "You're him," Daniel said, his voice calm, measured. "The one who requested the audit." Evan met his gaze. "I'm the one who's going to see it through." Daniel studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "That's good," he said, "because once we start, it doesn't stop halfway." Inside, the air felt heavier than before. Not with dust, with expectation. Clara moved quickly now, pulling files from cabinets, opening drawers that had remained closed for years, laying documents out across tables in neat but growing clusters. Daniel worked in silence, his eyes scanning numbers, tracing patterns, occasionally making small notations in a worn leather notebook he carried. Evan didn't interrupt. He watched, listened, learned. Hours passed, the room filled with paper, with discrepancies, with evidence that no longer felt like isolated mistakes. "They shifted distribution across 3 regions," Daniel said finally, tapping a page lightly. "Small percentages, always under the threshold that triggers automatic review." Evan leaned closer. "How long?" Daniel flipped back through several pages. "Long enough to build confidence in the system," he replied. "Then long enough to exploit it." Clara swallowed. "I processed these," she said quietly. "I didn't—" Evan looked at her. "You followed the system," he said. Her eyes met his, uncertain. "But the system wasn't right." She nodded once. Slowly, that was harder to accept. Ranger suddenly stood, not abruptly, but with intention, his head turned toward the hallway, ears forward, body still. Then, footsteps, measured, approaching. The door opened. Ryan Cole stepped inside. He looked exactly the way Evan remembered him. Early 30s, sharp features, clean cut in a way that suggested effort rather than discipline. His dark hair was styled neatly, his coat tailored perfectly, every detail controlled. Even his expression, especially his expression. Calm, amused. "Well," Ryan said, glancing around the room at the spread of documents, "this is dramatic." Clara froze. Daniel didn't look up. Evan remained where he was. Ryan's gaze moved slowly, taking in everything, then settled on Evan. "You've been busy," he said. Evan didn't answer. Ryan stepped further into the room, hand sliding casually into his coat pockets. "You know," he continued, "there are easier ways to make a point." "This isn't about a point," Evan said. Ryan smiled faintly. "Of course it is." Ranger shifted slightly, placing himself just a fraction closer to Evan. Not aggressive, just aligned. Ryan noticed. His eyes flicked to the dog, then back. "You really think this changes anything?" Ryan asked. Evan held his gaze. "It already has." Ryan let out a soft breath through his nose, almost a laugh. "You found some discrepancies," he said. "Congratulations." He gestured vaguely toward the papers. "Do you have any idea how large this operation is? How many moving parts?" Daniel finally spoke. "That's exactly why patterns matter," he said without looking up. Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly. "And you are?" "Someone who doesn't guess," Daniel replied. A pause. Then Ryan nodded slowly. "Right." He turned back to Evan. "You always did this," he said. "Jump into things without understanding the scale." Evan didn't react. Ryan stepped closer now, lowered his voice. "People already believe the version of you they've seen," he said quietly. "You're forcing doors. You're showing up uninvited. You're stirring things that don't need stirring." Evan's voice remained even. "They needed it." Ryan's smile faded, just slightly. "They don't think so," he replied. Silence settled again. Heavier this time. Ryan straightened. "Finish your audit," he said. "Write your report." He glanced once more at the room. "At the end of the day, it won't matter." He turned toward the door, paused, looked back. "Because perception," he added, "is already set." Then he left. The door closed softly behind him. No one spoke for several seconds. Then Daniel flipped another page. "Let's continue," he said calmly. Clara let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. Evan didn't move, because Ryan was wrong about one thing. Perception wasn't fixed. It was just ahead of the truth. And truth, real truth, took longer. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling lightly against the windows. Inside, the work continued. By late afternoon, the picture was clearer. Not complete, but enough. Funds redirected, contracts misreported, deliveries logged but never made. Not chaos, structure. Evan stepped away from the table, stretching his shoulders slightly. The fatigue was there now. Real. Earned. Ranger moved beside him, sitting quietly. Present. Evan looked down at him, then back at the files, then out the window. The town stretched beyond the glass. Same streets, same houses, same people who had looked at him differently just hours ago. He exhaled slowly. "They're not wrong to doubt," he said. Clara looked at him, confused. "They've seen systems fail before," Evan continued. "They've been told things were handled, when they weren't." Daniel nodded faintly. "That's how trust erodes," he said. Evan's jaw tightened. "And that's why we don't ask for it back," he said. He picked up one of the reports, set it back down carefully. "We show it." Clara's grip on the files steadied. Daniel closed his notebook. Ranger remained still, and for the first time since the video, since the storm, since the first door, Evan wasn't trying to prove anything. He was building something. There are moments in life when nothing looks like a miracle. No bright light, no voice from the sky, no sudden rescue, just a quiet choice. To stop when others keep walking, to listen when others turn away, to help when no one is watching. And yet, those are often the moments where God is closest, not always in what he gives, but in what he asks us to become. Evan thought he was stepping into a fight about money, reputation, and truth. But what he was really given was something far greater, a chance to stand where others had fallen silent, and to become the answer to someone else's prayer. Because sometimes, the miracle isn't what happens to us. It's what happens through us. In everyday life, it's easy to believe that we are too small to matter, too busy, too tired, too unnoticed. But somewhere, right now, there is someone who needs a door knocked on. Someone waiting for help that may never come unless someone chooses to care. And maybe that someone is you. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share your thoughts below. Tell us where you're watching from, and what part of this story stayed with you. Share this message with someone who needs to be reminded that goodness still exists in this world. And if you believe in stories that heal, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next one. May God bless you, guide your steps, and place you exactly where you are needed most.